We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Daled and Beis and Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 24b. The Mishnah continues, Yeser Mikan, more than this. Hayu lo shtei nashim, let's say a person has two wives, Zushmosei and Shavas, and the two wives have the same name. Kasav legarish as a gadol, if he writes the get in order to divorce the older of the wives, lo yagarish bo es akatani, he can't use that get for the younger wife, because again, same issue, it's not considered lishma. Yeser Mikan, even more than this, Amar le'lavler, if he says to the scribe, Kasav le'ezo she'ertza garish, let's say he says, write for whichever one of my wives I want to use it, I'm going to use it for. Pasal legarish bo, that also in that case as well, it's disqualified to use that get. Rashi says, Le'ezu she'ertza garish pasal legarish bo de'in b'reira. The point of the Mishnah at the end is, there is no breira. You can't say retroactively, it was clear that I wrote it for this particular wife. We don't say retroactively, it's clear that at the time of the writing he had in mind for this particular wife, and therefore it should be considered lishma. We do not say that. And the Gemara says, Kasav legarish es ishto v'nimlach v'chulo, says, let's say he wrote it to divorce his wife, then he decided he didn't want to use it, and somebody else wanted to use it. And the Gemara says, V'yelo reisha b'mai. Well, what was the first case of the Mishnah? That seems to be the same thing, where he hears a scribe writing out a get for somebody else, and then he wants to use that particular get. What's the difference between the first case of the Mishnah and the second case of the Mishnah? And the Gemara says, Amar Rapapa says, B'sofrin hu asuyin l'slamin askinon. The first case of the Mishnah is talking about when you have scribes who are learning how to write a get. They're not writing it for anyone in particular. It happens to be that the scribe chose this particular guy's name and his wife's name, and that's the first case of the Mishnah. We say that's not good because it's not lishma. And then the second case of the Mishnah is that it's written for a different individual who has the same name, and the person's wife has the same name, and then he wants to use that get, and the Mishnah says that is not good as well. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi says, Deiko Nami, I'll bring you proof from the Mishnah that that's the case, the Katani Sofrin Makrin, because it says Sofrin Makrin, that sounds like you have people teaching students how to write, Velo Katani Sofrin Korin. It doesn't say that the scribes are reading, which would sound like they're just reading their own Gittin, that they're writing for a particular individual. Shema Mina, and the Gemara says, indeed, you do see from the language of the Mishnah that line in the Mishnah is talking about where students are learning how to write a get. Rashi says, Makrin Hagadolim and Makrin Latalmidei. It means the older ones are teaching, they're reading for the younger ones, for the students, kach v'kach, so and such and such, k'sheyavo get lefanecha, kasvu v'izkiru shem inish, alma b'talmid maskin. It says, write it this way, and then they just mentioned a particular name, and that's what was going on in the first case of the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Ma yeser mikan. What does it mean in the Mishnah when it says more than this? How is each case a greater chiddush than the one before it? Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, so it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, it means as follows, Lo zeh shenichtav shelo l'shem gerushin. Not only this case, the first case of the Mishnah, it's not even meant for the purpose of a divorce at all. Elav zeh shenichtav l'shem gerushin, but even if it was meant for a divorce of a different individual, pasul, that's still pasul because it's not considered l'shma, it's not for this particular man and woman. V'lo zeh shenichtav shelo l'shem gerushin didei, not only in this case where it wasn't for his divorce, even if it was written for him, but not for this particular wife, it's possible. And not only this case where it's not written for this particular wife, even when it was written for this particular wife, again, it should have been it was written for this wife, even in this case where it was written for this particular wife, again, assuming you would have used breira, possible, but that's possible again, because there is no breira. And now the Gemara explains all of the yeser mikans and the reasons behind them. My time, and what's the reason why each case is not good? Because of v'nasan sefer krisus biyada. If it only said v'nasan sefer krisus, havamina lemute heichkama. So I would have said that excludes the first case. To lo avid l'shum krisus, that's not even made for separation. That's just made for training purposes. So if it would have just said krisus, of course, the first case of the Mishnah would be excluded. Aval kasav l'garish ishto v'nimlach da'avid l'shum krisus. But in the second case of the Mishnah, where he writes it to divorce his wife, changes his mind, then someone else wants to use it, that at least was written for separation purposes, for divorce purposes. Ema kosher, I might say that's kosher, and so therefore kosher rachmana v'chasav, the pasuk says v'chasav, and that tells you no, it needs to be written for this particular individual. If it just said v'chasav, I would say that excludes that case where it wasn't for this husband. But if it was for this husband who has two wives, where he's writing it just not for that particular wife, ema kosher, I would say that's kosher. Kosher rachmana la lishma, the pasuk says law, means it has to be for her sake also, it has to be for this particular wife. And finally, the very last case of the Mishnah, why do we have that case? Hakamash Malan, Dain Breyer, again, like we said above, that teaches us there is no Breyer. We don't say retroactively, it's clarified that you were writing it for this particular wife. That also is considered not Lishma. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, if he writes it to divorce the older wife, he can't use it to divorce his younger wife. And the Gemara says, he's not allowed to use it to divorce the younger wife. But apparently he is allowed to use it for the older wife, even though you have a situation over here where it's not 100% clear. They both have the exact same name. The older wife and the younger wife have the same name, yet you're allowed to give it to that older wife. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Zoso Meres, this shows, Shnei Yosef ben Shimon Hadorn Bi'irachas. Let's say you have two people with the same name. They're both named Yosef ben Shimon and they live in the same city. Motzi and Shtarchov Alacherim. They're allowed to take out a document against others and collect, just like over here. The wife, the older wife, is allowed to produce this get and show that she's divorced, even though there's another wife with the exact same name. So too, two individuals named Yosef ben Shimon, they're able to take out as creditors, they can take out a document to collect, even though there's some other guy, even though this Yosef ben Shimon is taking it out and there's another guy with the same name, Yosef ben Shimon, still he's allowed to take out the shtar chov against other people to collect from them. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya, Abaya said to Rava, and we should note that the Mesoras Hashas says it shouldn't be Rava, but it should be Rabba. Abaya said to him, Ela me'ata, but according to that, to Reisha the Katani. What about the Reisha of the Mishnah which says, Shmi kashimcha pasal agarish, but let's say he says, my name is like your name, so he's disqualified. If the husband says, I have the same name as you, can I use your get? That's not going to be good. So Sheni udelo matzim megarish. So in that case, that second person is trying to use the other person's get. He can't use it. Harishon matzim megarish. But the first husband, who the get was written for, he is able to use it to divorce, even though there's another person in the city with the same name. But we say in terms of this issue of shtar chov, we say that's not true by shtar chov. We say velo acher yochel lahotzi alei and shtar chov. Someone else cannot come with a document and collect from Yosef ben Shimon if there's another person in the city that's also named Yosef ben Shimon. The person can say that document's not meant to collect from me; it's meant to collect from somebody else. So the same thing should be true over here. This individual should not be able to use the get for his wife, even though the get was written for him, because when the wife will produce this get, they'll be able to say maybe that get wasn't from her husband, maybe it was from the other individual who had the same name. And so the Gemara says clearly the cases by shtar chov are not comparable to our cases in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah it's different. Rather, what do you have to say? You have to say that in our Mishnah, the reason why the original people, so to speak, are allowed to use the gittin, whether it's the husband or the wife, is because it's be'edei mesira of Rebbe Lazari. Our Mishnah, there's edei mesira, there are witnesses who see the giving of the get, and it follows Rebbe Lazar. So hachanami, so here also, meaning in both cases of the Mishnah, say the same thing. Be'edei mesira of Rebbe Lazar, you have to say that they're edei mesira, and it follows Rebbe Lazar, and it's because of the fact that they're Edom Mesira, so the Edom Mesira are there to testify that this is being used for this particular husband and this particular wife. That's why it's good, otherwise it would not be good. And Rashi says, Be'edei Mesira Shemakirim Eshneim, the Edom Mesira recognize them both. Umeidin Sharosh, Azem Masr Lazud, they're able to testify it was this person who gave it to that person. Aval Be'edei Chasima lo, but if it would just be Edei Chasima no, it would be a problem. Kedamina, like we said, Shemanimlach Zesha Kasva V'chasma V'lo Girish Zishto, Umasr Lazu, Eshes Chaver, maybe really this get belonged to the other husband and was really for his wife, and then the guy decided not to use it, so he gave it to the other person's wife, and therefore that would not be good in that situation. Hachanami here also, Be'edei Mesira, here also in a situation of the two wives with the same name, the only reason it's good is because they're Edei Mesira. That's why there's no concern that maybe one wife gave it to the other. But again, by Edei Chasima, we are afraid maybe it was really her friend that was divorced. Again, maybe it was transferred from one to the other. By Shtori Chov also, by Shtori Chov, they're not able to take the Shtori Chov out on others. You have this problem that there are people with the same name. We're afraid that maybe it fell and went to the other individual. Again, it's only in our Mishnah, in our two cases in the Mishnah, the reason why it's effective is because there are Edei Mesira. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav says, Kulon Poslan Bekuna, all of the cases in our Mishnah, even though the Gerishin is not good, however, it's enough of a Gerishin to make these women disqualified from Kahuna. It's considered to be what we call a Reach HaGet, the scent of a get, and they're considered to be Grusha in terms of marrying a Kohen. Chutz min Arishon, but Rav says, except for the first case where they're just training to write Gittin, so there it's not even a Reach HaGet, and it does not disqualify the wife from the Kahuna. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Afrishon Nami Posel, even in the first case of the Mishnah, she is disqualified from the kahuna. Rashi says, "Kulan kol gittin hashnuin v'mishnaseinu afapisha psul negarish latirin linase." Even though these gittin in the Mishnah are not good in order to allow these women to remarry, poslan heino sam min hakuna, but they are considered divorcees in terms of disqualifying the women from a kohen. And bala kohen nifsala Allah misham grusha. For example, if her husband is a kohen, she will be posel to her husband. She'll be disqualified from being married to that husband because she's a divorcee. Chutz min arishon, except for the first case, shelo nichtav l'shem gerish and klal, because in the first case it wasn't written for divorce at all. But the other cases are considered what's called the reach haget, the scent of the get, so to speak, and that does disqualify from kahuna. The Tanya beperek basra, as we learned in the last parak. If he says to his wife, "You're divorced from me," but it's a divorce that doesn't allow you to marry anyone else, so that's not really a divorce. However, paslam and akuna, however, that is enough to disqualify her from kahuna. Shenemar v'isha gerusha meisha afilo neskarsha elamisha. Even if she's only divorced from her husband, but it doesn't allow her to marry anyone else, still that's psula lekahuna. Still she is pasul. She's disqualified from marrying a kohen because of reach haget. And the Gemara continues, V'yaz the Shmuel Atayim, and Shmuel follows his reasoning when he says even the first case she's disqualified from kahuna. He follows what he says, Diamar Shmuel, because Shmuel says, Kol makom sheshanu chachamim get pasul, uposel. Anytime the chachamim say that a get is pasul, what it means is it's pasul, and it also disqualifies her from the kahuna. And similarly, anytime it says chalitza psula, that the chalitza is pasul, psula uposaltem and it's pasul, meaning it's not a good chalitza in the sense that it allows her to marry other individuals, but it also does disqualify her. It's enough of a chalitza to disqualify her from doing yibum with the brothers. B'ma'arava amri mishmei Rebbe Elazar, in the west they say in the name of Rebbe Elazar, smol v'layla psulos uposlos. If the chalitza is done with the left shoe, or if it's done at night, so it's not a good chalitza, and it also disqualifies her from the other brothers. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chof Hey Amud Aleph.